When it comes to the wall that Donald talks about building, he went to Mexico. He had a meeting with the Mexican president, didn't even raise it. He choked.
I want to build the wall. We need the wall. The Border Patrol, ICE, they all want the wall. We stop the drugs. We shore up the border.
Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton's stances on immigration dominated the 2016 debates. But this year, the issue is taking a back seat on the campaign trail. Moderator Chris Wallace did not ask a single question about immigration to President Trump or Joe Biden at Tuesday's debate. The candidates did not emphasize issues specific to Latino and Hispanic voters, but that still hasn't prevented House Democrats from putting a sharp focus on the Trump administration's immigration policies. Several lawmakers traveled to the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia this weekend. A whistleblower says female detainees at an ICE contracted facility told her that they had their uteruses removed without their consent. The New York Times spoke with more than a dozen women at the facility. Many fear that they received invasive and potentially unnecessary gynecological procedures. Representative Nanette Diaz Barragán visited the detention center in Georgia. She's a Democrat serving California's 44th district. She's also a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and sits on the House Homeland Security Committee. Welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you for having me.
So please tell our viewers, what did you hear from the detainees at the Irwin County facility, and what conditions did you yourself see there?
Well, it was very disturbing. It was quite horrific to see these women and to hear them. I wanted to say we tried to bring in, the members of Congress tried to bring in our phones so that we can have these women in their own words tell their story, but they refused to allow us to do so. And I believe it's because the pain and the horror you hear in their voice is something they don't want the American people to hear. They were telling the stories of themselves going to see a doctor because they were having maybe pain, vaginal pain or problems, and then being given injections they didn't even know about. One of the ladies had her medical records, and she showed it to me and said, I've gotten injections. I don't know what for. I didn't authorize this. Can you take a look? And I looked at the document, and it was something called Depo-Provera, which was basically a contraceptive, and she started bleeding for 42 days, having extreme pain. But again, the issue here is these women don't know what's being done to them. They're not provided. They're not given the authorization to do it. And the more you talk to women, the more you realize how some of these procedures are, as far as hysterectomies, taking out the wrong thing, thinking they're going into surgery and coming out with a completely different procedure done. And this is a human rights abuse. And I spoke to the Inspector General, who advises that everything's going to be investigated and even criminal charges will be looked at as necessary.
Certainly, if this is true, it is horrific. But in a statement to CBS News, a lawyer for the doctor accused of involuntarily sterilizing patients disputed the account, saying that his client, quote, strongly disputes any allegations that he treated any patient with anything other than the utmost care and respect. He also disputes that patients were treated without their full informed consent. What actions, though, do you plan to take as a member of the House Homeland Security Committee to really investigate these allegations to get at the truth?
Well, the first thing that we're doing this week is the House is voting actually today, debating on the resolution on this very issue that really calls for a stop of deportation of any of the women who've undergone procedures. It's going to stop any retaliation, because that is happening in these facilities. Women are being retaliated against if they're speaking up, if they're being a witness to this horrific conduct. And so number one, that has to stop. Number two, I think we need to reassess the women that are there. Many of them have family members here. Their spouse is a permanent resident. There's no reason to have them in detention, and there should be considered all the alternatives for alternative to detention. But we really got to make sure that the Inspector General conducts this investigation independently and that we do something about it. Oftentimes, we get a report and nothing is done about it. If that means putting into place guardrails for these contractors, then we need to do it. I'm a firm believer we need to put an end to the for-profit contractors that we have, because there continues to be many abuses, not just in this instance, and not enough is being done. So Congress really has the power of the purse and the ability to put in guardrails, but we also have to do something when this Inspector General comes back with their recommendations and their report, and we won't stop until we get to the bottom of this.
You heard me mention that at Tuesday's debate, there was no talk at all about immigration. Does immigration need to be a larger emphasis of the 2020 campaign? And what do you want to hear from both President Trump and Joe Biden on specific issues that really affect Hispanic voters?
Well, absolutely. Latinos make up a huge voting bloc in this country, and immigration is one of many issues Latinos care about, just like they care about health care and jobs and the economy. But immigration is going to be at the forefront. Joe Biden has said that on day one, he's going to put together an immigration plan that's going to provide a pathway to citizenship. We want to hear about those plans. We want to hear about what is going to happen to DACA recipients who are living in a state right now of uncertainty. We want to hear about what's going to happen to the 11 million undocumented. We want to hear about what the pathway is going to be, because these are people like my parents who contribute to this country. We are a nation of immigrants, and the conversation has to happen. I'm hopeful that in the next debate in the town hall, we will hear more about this topic. But I also want to make sure that we're clear. You know, Latinos across the country, we're a very diverse group. Our top issues are the same issues that American people care about, and that includes things like healthcare and the economy. But there is no doubt immigrants are in fear right now. We're seeing that in people who are afraid to go get treatment for COVID-19. We're seeing that in the census response, and we have to put an end to these anti-immigrant policies, which is why I believe we need change in November.
The Congressional Hispanic Caucus spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci, to your point about health care, about the coronavirus. I'm wondering if you feel like the United States, given the disproportionate effect that it has had on Latino communities, has done well enough by communities of color, specifically in addressing the current health crisis. And how do you think Congress ought to better deal with these issues?
Well, we haven't done enough. I mean, that's the bottom line. And speaking to Dr. Fauci, I expressed one of my concerns with him. We have clinical trials happening. When they provided me a list of the clinical trials near my district, I have South Los Angeles, it's very hard and very challenging for people in my district, which is 70% Latino, to get to these clinical trials. So when you have the disproportionate impact of communities of color, Latinos, African Americans being impacted, and we're not represented in these clinical trials, I think that's a complete mistake, and we're not going to have a vaccine we're going to make sure is responsive to them. So we need to make sure we're investing in closing the gap in disparities in health. That's preventive care, access to health care. But we also need to make sure that Latinos are not left behind, that we're included in these clinical trials, that we have access to a vaccine when it is available. And that's another topic I brought up with Dr. Fauci, was to make sure that community health centers are going to have access to the vaccine when it becomes available. Because there are a lot of working class Latinos across this country, many of them who may not have access to a physician or doctor, who go to these community health centers that need to have equal access. We know that's not happening, and it hasn't been happening with COVID testing. So let's not make that mistake again in making sure that they have the ability to get the vaccine. But we also need to educate and inform them about the vaccine and what it will do to them. Right now, we have to focus on coming up with a plan. There is still no national testing strategy and tracing that we need to do, which is one of the reasons House Democrats are pushing hard to get funding for the HEROES bill, because it will put more money into communities and help communities of color in making sure they have the adequate testing. But this is all tied to healthcare and making sure that our Latino communities have that access so that we can close that gap and stop some of these pre-existing conditions that we have and we're more susceptible to.
Yeah, I know that all communities in the U.S. are really looking for Congress to be able to make a breakthrough when it comes to some of these bills, particularly that COVID stimulus bill. Representative Diaz Barragán, thank you so much.
Thank you.